U.S. allows prisoners to be sentenced to life sentences without the possibility of parole. Rather than facing a lifetime punishment, should we allow prisoners to opt for the death penalty? We'll start with you, Chris. Give us an opening statement.
Prime, as you know, that I'm strongly opposed to assisted suicide, and the option that you've presented of opting into the death penalty if you are somebody who's on death row, or somebody who has a life sentence without the possibility of parole but is not on death row, is to me just kind of another form of that. In general and in principle, I think I accept the possibility of the legitimacy of the death penalty, because I accept that punishments or crimes ought to be proportional, and I think there are some things that are so bad that the only proportional punishment is something like the death penalty. In practicality and in the way that it actually works in the U.S. criminal justice system, that's a whole different issue entirely.
Thank you. All right, Goddess.
Because in the U.S. we allow people to be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, I think it's fair that we allow prisoners to opt for the death penalty. I don't think it's something that should ever be like forced on somebody, but I think if somebody chooses that they want to, I think that it's their individual autonomy, especially given that we don't know what conditions they're living in. There would have to be like some preconditions, maybe family members are notified, maybe they are evaluated by a medical professional to make sure there's no abuse going on. Right.
Scott, please.
I don't think that any human is irredeemable, and the problem here is life in prison without the possibility of parole, and then saying like, oh, well, they have the option to kill themselves. That's not an option, because you're using coercion, and then you're given a choice between these two things, and somehow that's supposed to make people feel better about the situation. I think what we have to do is fundamentally dismiss with that and move to the actual crux of the problem here, which is that people are being put in prison no matter what, and they can never leave because we as a society have deemed that some crimes make these people irredeemable. And I think that's very anti-human and very anti-liberty of us.
Steven.
Whether you're for or against the death penalty, letting people opt in or out of it, I think is a bad idea. It creates a whole bunch of really crazy incentives. I can already see where like people start to measure the opt-in things for different prisons or different racial groups, and then people say it's racist, or that some prisons are just so horrible that people are opting into the death penalty anyway, and it just seems like not a good idea. If we have the death penalty, then we should reserve it for whatever crimes we decide to use it for. It shouldn't be like an opt-in. That's really silly.
Ubi.
Yeah, I'm actually very much in favor of the death penalty. So spending all this money to keep them in prison without even the option to opt out on their own and go with like an assisted suicide seems wasteful and actually kind of cruel. Because what you're in effect saying is that, you know, somebody who's dealing with the anguish, right, the mental anguish of being in prison for the rest of their lives, right? You'd rather force them to stay in that fucked up situation and to deal with that mental anguish, to punish them for a thing that they have no hope of making any kind of like real like recompense for.
Okay, open to the panel.
The question itself is not really about like the criminal justice system itself, as it's specifically about allowing people whether they can volunteer into execution or not. And while I agree with you guys on the idea that we should like maybe look at the circumstances around this and make sure people aren't being coerced into this, like I don't feel comfortable telling somebody that if they've decided that they want to like end their lives, I don't feel comfortable telling somebody that, well, you have to wait and you have to live in like a really shitty situation and be in anguish all the time.
It seems like at that point you'd be saying you have to stay here because we want you to live out your sentence as punishment, right? It seems similar to that, because it doesn't seem like they're waiting to like clear anything up, or if they've been convicted and this person isn't appealing, right? Then like what are they waiting for?
The issue isn't whether or not we should allow people to opt in for the death penalty. The issue is that people are being sentenced with life in prison without the possibility of parole. And for some, yeah, opting in for the death penalty might seem like the better of those two choices. But the problem here is that there's literally no path to redemption for these people.
It sounds like we're arguing whether or not we should or shouldn't have life in prison or the death penalty, rather than should we, because that's where we're segueing into with that argument.
Yeah, I'd rather focus on the argument itself.
I mean, I am focusing on the argument by saying that that's the problem. Unless the argument hinges on just so you know, none of you are allowed to be against the life in prison without the possibility of parole, and you must all believe in that. And it kind of handcuffs our ability to even be able to talk honestly about it.
I agree with you. A lot of this is going to be about, well, if we changed up our system, our system, created a more equitable system, right? A more fairer system, that would clear up a lot of this. And I agree, that would be the case. But in terms of the system that we have now, if it's going to be in place for a long time, and it probably will be, could we give these people this option?
I think Destiny's right that like this does create some really weird institutional incentives. Like you're just gonna have prisons like we saw reporting recently about like the conditions currently in like Rikers or something, right? You're gonna have prisons where it's just so bad and so shitty and the guards are so awful that you're just gonna have like wildly high rates of opting in, and that's there's an equity problem there for sure. And I don't know how you solve that.
There was a study on the people who volunteered, death row inmates who volunteered. I believe it's 88% struggled with mental illness or substance abuse. I still think that it should be just the system that we have right now in place. I just don't think it's fair to force people to be imprisoned for life.
Well, but I mean, like, if that's the punishment, like, that's the punishment, right? Like,
right, so taking prime at this, right, so if we're just going to take the system as it is, we've decided, at least in some states, that there are crimes that are so bad under certain circumstances and given certain, evidence presented at trial that they deserve death. And then there are other ones that just deserve life in prison. We've distinguished those two things already. And then the possible justification for that person who's in prison for the rest of their life should then be able to choose that they want to die. Like you could have different arguments for each of those things. I just don't know how we make those.
Yeah, so I honestly don't think that if their punishment is imprisonment for the rest of their life, I'm not really sure what the point of that punishment is.
Does everyone here know the story of Caleb Browder? Kid totally didn't steal a backpack, got accused of stealing a backpack, and he was in Rikers for over 2 years without ever going to trial. Constantly basically being forced into trial, or and the prosecution would just be like, oh, well, we need a delay or an extension. And by asking for a delay or an extension, even though you're not supposed to be there longer than 6 months, there's like this weird loophole where like they wouldn't count the time in between the ability to get the court date where they would ask for the extension, et cetera, right? And eventually they just let the kid go. And after spending 2 years in Rikers, he developed depression so bad that he committed suicide out of prison. Like, how do you even get to make the claim that this isn't a humane action? All it is a paperwork nightmare so that some people can feel like they did something good, and they didn't. What they did is they let people kill themselves so that they don't have blood on their hands.
I don't understand what the purpose is of imprisoning somebody. If somebody has done something so bad, imprisoning somebody for life, right? If somebody has done something so bad that we've deemed them not able to be entering back in society, that they should be imprisoned forever, I don't see what the difference is between that and just letting them opt in for death. And I get it. There's like ethical issues with this. There's like,
right.
We want to make sure that these people aren't being coerced. But if the system is as it is right now, and that is how people are being treated in prisons where they're not given parole, and we've decided to just remove them from society, and they're not really, I don't know. I just don't understand.
I don't want to be the person defending like life in prison without the possibility of parole, because I don't want to, but I don't know that it's necessarily that you've decided they aren't worthy of redemption. I think the standard reasoning is that there are some people who just are literally incorrigible, who you can't possibly redeem, and whether that's demonstrated by their conduct once or repeated conduct, I don't know. There's all sorts of qualifications for how you get life in prison. But I don't know if it's like a question of worthiness so much as just like the assumption is there are people who are so bad that we could not even hope to have them re-enter society, or alternatively, as Scott said, it's an issue of punishment, that where the reasoning behind it is we have to punish this in some way, and the only possible punishment that works or that is fair or that pays their debt to society or whatever it is the rest of their life. And
there's
but like, why not all these people like are still pleading their innocence? Right? Some of these people have admitted they're guilty. Samuel Little, I think he is the most prolific serial killer in American history. Killed like 90 people. and he's given interviews. He gave interviews gloating about it and laughing about it. And this man, when he was caught in 2012, he had diabetes, had a heart condition, and we ended up paying for that for the rest of his life, until he died in I think 2020, in a hospital. Right, the Golden State Killer, who's in prison right now, killed, raped, and murdered I think 50 something people, right, over decades. We're paying for that guy too. So if we have somebody like this, right, there's no chance this person's fucking innocent. They're not arguing that they're innocent. They've admitted they've done these things. What use is there to anybody, right? By having them sit there while we pay for their medication, pay for their surgeries if they have a heart condition, pay to keep them alive if they want to opt out, if they'd rather just check out and do assisted suicide.
Yeah, and there's no debt that's being paid by them sitting there for the rest of their lives, other than just punishing somebody. That I just don't see the reason.
Yeah, like Scott, I mean, if you're opposed to life in prison, what kind of punishment would you give to somebody like Samuel Little or the Golden State Killer? People who've killed dozens of people, raped and murdered dozens of people across the country.
I didn't say I was against, I said nothing about being against life in prison. What I'm against is life in prison without the possibility of parole.
So
right, and I think there's a big distinction
for somebody who's murdered 90 people.
Yes.
Right, but the question itself is,
I would just give them the
people...
death penalty. That just seems straightforward.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's my position. I'm not moving from it.
Other than, let's say, the cases where there could be abuse happening, and that's why I would say there needs to be some preconditions to allowing somebody electing for death. But I don't see what the issue is. If you're already removing them from society and you deem that they are not worthy of parole, then what is the issue of letting them remove themselves from society further?
The real problem here is that you seem to be approaching it from a utilitarian perspective. If the person kills themselves, Doobie's it'll be a little cheaper to the taxpayer, right? We will save some money. I don't know how much it costs to house a serial killer another 20 years in jail, but if we compare that to, let's say, the cost of housing people in jail or the cost of America's budget, I'm sure that it would be statistically insignificant, right? And so to other people from other moral positions, they just simply say murdering people is wrong or assisted suicide is wrong, or they have my position that said life in prison without a possibility of parole is wrong. And so they're both evil choices. And when being told to pick between evil and evil, I say, no, I don't pick the lesser of two evils.
Okay, so firstly, we always pick the lesser of two evils because everything can be measured in degrees of evil or goodness, right? There's nothing that we fully 100% agree with. So that statement is just completely meaningless. Secondly, obviously there's going to be different, depending on your moral framework, your choice. But I mean, that's kind of what we were discussed, right?
Right.
Yeah,
well, I gave what I think, and then I was explaining to Stardust, right? And it's I don't see the point. And I'm like, well, here's why there's a breakaway.
I don't know why you brought in the utilitarian. I don't know all that stuff, bro. I don't know.
That was for Doobie.
Okay.
Well, yeah, but there's nobody is taking a purely utilitarian in the sense that we're literally just analyzing dollars. I don't think anybody here took that.
Doobie was literally doing that.
So no, hold on. I listed that as one of the benefits. So not only is it cheaper, but no, we don't gain anything. The person doesn't gain anything. I'm sure the victims don't gain anything by knowing that the person is sitting there in a cell forever. Right, we're gonna hook them up to an IV and keep them alive for as long as we can keep them alive for fucking what? It doesn't seem like there's any reason for that. In fact, it seems cruel.
There's countless examples of people being put in prison for crimes that they didn't commit, right? Yeah. And then being exonerated later. And many of those people, if given the option to kill themselves to escape their anguish and pain, might have fucking done it. And instead, we facilitated the suicide of innocent people who could have been freed later by additional exculpatory evidence because we gave them this option to do this because we were torturing them in prison.
Even if it's torture, do you feel comfortable telling somebody hey, sorry, I can't let you decide to end your life when you want to, because guess what? This might be torture for you and we need to reform the entire prison system before we even think about doing that. I don't feel like that's very cool.
It's supposed to be torture. It's prison.
It's
supposed to be an unpleasant experience. That's the point. Our point in America behind prison is that it's unpleasant, right?
Yeah. Yes, I'm perfectly comfortable telling somebody who's decided they want to kill themselves not to kill themselves and trying to stop them. Yes.
Okay, but there's a famous example. I think a few years ago of this woman who was like sexually assaulted repeatedly, right? And she'd been in that hospital, she'd been to therapists and psychiatrists, and she just couldn't live with it, right? So she decided to go for assisted suicide. They tried to convince her out of it, and she decided to go through with it, and she did. Right. So if somebody is their reality or their waking reality is like torment, why would you want them to stay there?
I don't want them to stay there. I also don't want them to kill themselves. Yeah, I think it's a
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd rather-
like when I brought this up earlier, somebody in the chat said, "Well, if you're against assisted suicide, you just don't care about people suffering." It's the same argument that I've had. No, I don't think that's true. I think it's no. What I want is
Yeah, I don't think you don't.
people
I don't
suffering
think
to
you
be
don't care about people
alleviated through
suffering.
means that I don't think
Yeah.
are morally reprehensible. So,
But
Can we
the
just-
way
can
that
you
their
just-
suffering would be alleviated would be possibly be them like no longer being in prison. But that's not a possibility anymore.
You could just be of the position that like the state shouldn't be in the business of killing people. That might be a position that somebody would take, that like keeping people in prison for even indefinite amounts of time is an acceptable way for the state to punish people, but the state shouldn't be in the business of actually killing citizens. So maybe we don't ever give an option for somebody to like, do the death penalty, but you can lock people up indefinitely if the crimes they've committed societally have been decided to be bad enough that,
But you can also believe, I think, that the state is the one who should be dealing out the death penalty. But if it is a case that we've decided it is not worthy of the death penalty, then allowing that person to opt in and commit assisted suicide is skirting that process. If you think there is a legitimate means of dealing out death level punishments for crimes, which is the state, then yeah, just like killing yourself could be out of bounds as well. I think both of those options are possible.
Well, Destiny demanded that I pick the lesser of two evils. So under your framework, yeah, obviously I'm against the state doling out death in any form, shape, or capacity, including assisted suicide. But I mean, I'm against both of these ideas, right? And it just seems like a way for people to try and feel better about the fact that they're locking people in prison for the rest of their life. It just seems like one more way of like, it seems like very often our society comes up with ideas where it's very separate from the violence that the state is enacting on people. And so long as it can get like a little bit of like a little bit of a spoonful of sugar to make medicine go down, right? Like then all of a sudden people will stop bitching for a little while.
So this seems like the opposite. I would say that about your position. So you're saying that these people need to stay in a system that we acknowledge is torture. You've said multiple times is torture. You need to stay there, right? Rather than take control of your life and decide what you want to do with it. So this person,
that's a false choice.
It's not.
You don't have control of your life. You're locked in a cage.
No,
and you're not allowed to leave.
Ending your life is the ultimate decision, right? About your life is to end your
but
life.
It's that,
right?
no. You can't say that's any element of choice there. You're being tortured and coerced, and you're not allowed to leave.
When you're in prison, you get very little choice when you're in prison. This is true. Yes, I know, right? It's not
some expansion of liberty to let people fucking kill themselves in prison.
I think it is.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I think it is.
I think it
Yeah.
can
No,
be.
it's
I think
not.
it can be. I think it can be. I think with the right to choose when your life ends can be like the ultimate like expression of your freedom, essentially, right?
A choice made at the end of a gun is no choice at all. It's duress.
Is somebody choosing assisted suicide at the end of like cancer? Is that not a choice you can make? If somebody is locked in prison, they're there. It's not like the option is like either freedom or assisted suicide. It's you're either locked in prison forever, or you're locked in prison forever, or you could opt to do the death penalty if you want to do it. Those are your two choices before you. Just like if you're doing assisted suicide because of like some sort of medical ailment, you're either dying of cancer or you are doing assisted suicide instead of prolonging the unhealthy years of your life of dying of cancer.
Destiny, it is not the same thing when a system of individuals is forcing you into a cage and you have no choice.
No, hold on. You're
Versus
not
being
forced into a
afflicted
cage.
with a
No.
disease.
You're not forced
can I
into
walk
a
out?
cage. No.
Can I
you're
come
not
over and
forced
kill
there.
you
You're
and
there
then
of
get
your own
charged?
actions. Societally speaking, we have decided that if this is like when you fail a paper and the teacher
What
says, I didn't
actions gave this person cancer? Is it
Hold on,
now?
wait, no. We're
is it the
talking about
cigarette
being
smoking? What are you talking
in
about?
jail. We're talking about being in jail. When you're in jail, you're not just there randomly. You've done some set of actions in society to end up in jail. You've earned that spot, just like you earned
Ideally,
that on
right?
paper.
But we were also
Unless you're
introduced to
innocent.
the possibility of-
What?
So assuming you're guilty,
So yeah, that's the assumption I believe we're all working under, right? Assuming you're guilty, right, and you're going to be
You're
there
right.
anyway.
You're right. No one is, but they could be innocent, right? But assuming
Hopefully
this
an
person
innocent
is
person
guilty,
doesn't opt for the death penalty. Who knows, right? Regardless, there's problems with innocent people being in jail too. There's problems with innocent people not going to jail. Yeah, that's not part of this example. The argument is if you have somebody that's in jail and they've got a life in prison, should they be able to opt for the death penalty? To say that they're being forced to opt for it, like they're already in jail. It's not like they have an option to be free. It's either
it said it's under duress.
Every single possible decision you make in jail is quote unquote under duress.
Exactly, which is why it is the state that is the guardian of these people. You're being tortured by the state, and then
you're being tortured for a reason because you earned it. You earned the torture.
Right,
when we're talking about somebody in prison, there is no freedom option. There's no good option. You're always going to be there. You're always going to be under duress. That's just the reality of the situation that you're in.
We can use undue influence instead of duress if you want to get slippery with the words. But the argument itself is that people are forcing people into a situation that they could change. The state could give people the possibility of parole.
So what you're really arguing is that we just shouldn't have life without parole. That's the whole argument then that you're making.
It's not the whole argument.
That is the entire argument.
That is a poor.
You're saying that because the whole argument is that
you just pay attention.
I am paying attention. The whole argument you're saying is that there's an alternative. The state just shouldn't give people these types of sentences. That's not the argument, but that's what you want to argue.
That is what you're arguing, right? That
no shit.
The state could give Samuel Little or the Golden State Killer guy or the Grim Sleeper, whoever the fuck, right? It could have given them the option of parole, right? If you killed like 90 people, you're probably not going to get parole at any time soon, right? So like, is having it on a piece of paper somewhere enough for you to say that, oh, well, hey, this person has the option of parole, so, you know, we should just leave them in prison forever. Even if we know they're never going to actually get parole.
You could have literal fucking body camera footage of them murdering people and their confession. And there's still the ever so slightest possibility that this person is innocent. It is not the purview of the state to murder people or to assist in murdering people at all.
It's not murder.
It's murder.
What does murder mean to you?
If you kill someone when your life is no longer in danger, it's murder.
Murdering is when you kill somebody without provocation. That's what murder means when we're talking ethics, right? So if somebody like kills, you know, somebody else and the state decides to send somebody blah, 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 this is not considered murder. Nobody would call that murder.
I am.
Oh, well, touche. Okay.
Do you think that you said that you think the state should not be like responsible for killing people? Do you think that the state should be responsible for preventing somebody from dying or if they want to die?
Yeah, I think so.
Like in all cases, like the state has a right to, if somebody chooses to like walk off a cliff for whatever fucking reason.
I mean, I'm doing this in the context of people in prison, not in all cases.
Does the state have the right to imprison somebody for life?
Yeah, I mean, like, so long as they have an ability that of exculpatory evidence or there's some process so that if they're later found innocent, right, that they have the pathway to be able to overturn a conviction.
You could do that.
Yeah, that's different than parole because like there are people who have been on death row, right, who've been shown
let
to
me
be innocent,
rephrase.
right?
Sorry, right. let me rephrase. I think that everyone should be able to have the ability to parole because even if they can't prove their innocence, they may be innocent. Right. Even if they've exhausted all of their appellate court and everything, the Supreme Court was like, nah, deny. Right. There still may be people that are innocent that can then prove themselves and change. I think everyone should have the ability to parole. That doesn't mean that you just get out automatically. Right. So for your serial killer that admitted to killing 90 people. Right. And there's video evidence and all of this. I think they should have the right to parole, even if we kind of know that the parole isn't going to go through. But there are some people, like there have been reformed gang members that have like shot people, and you know, like that have become like paragons of fighting against gang activity and violence, right? That they went into prison, they spent 20 years in prison, they've been preaching to people like this is not the way to go. They have changed their fucking life, and I think, you know, even though they have murdered people. They have absolutely murdered people in shootings. And I think that if you've done 20 or 30 years, even if you've killed 10 fucking people and you've shown an exemplar record of trying to do good in the world, you have I don't see this person as a threat to society anymore. As a matter of fact, they're a positive net gain for society and they should be let out despite killing 10 people.
I don't understand that line of thinking.
Fair enough.
I mean, Scott, we've spoken before about like I've watched like a lot of serial killer documentaries and shit, right? So maybe I've just seen too many of them. Right? Maybe I've just seen too many of them, and I know too much about what these people have done, and I can't imagine forgiving somebody like that guy in Canada who made women into like fucking makeup products and sold them to people, almost 50 of them, and he bragged about it. Fuck that guy, right? So like,
Right, but you're talking
I
about
just
an
don't understand the
extreme
thinking.
case here, right? Right, and
Well,
that's
typically,
the issue.
if you're
is that
on
you're
death
talking-
row or you're in prison for life, it's typically not like a normal case, right? These are people
right,
who've done
but
terrible
what I
things.
just described are people. I can't remember the person's name exactly, but I'm thinking of a specific person that was on death row for murdering multiple people that became an anti-gang activist. Right?
Yeah, like Tukey Williams or whatever, right? Wrote some children's books, said, "Hey, don't get into gangs or whatever the fuck." But he murdered a family, if I remember correctly. Still, fuck that guy. Like I don't understand. I just don't
Right.
understand
I think it's just a fundamental difference between you and me, which I think you think some people are irredeemable and I don't.
Yeah.
The way
I want to check in with you, Chris, here.
We're kind of all over the place with this conversation. Like I said, I think there's different possible justifications for the death penalty, and then assisted suicide, which really is kind of what we're talking about. Assisted suicide in a particular case where maybe somebody's under duress or they're a punishment for something that maybe they deserve, but like it's a particular kind of assisted suicide.
We're specifically talking about, again, a situation and when somebody has no chance of parole.
I feel like that in a system lacking of any sort of compassion, being the American prison system, that giving people that sort of choice is a very poor form of compassion. I'm doing this because I want to give people the option of what to do with their own lives. This is why I'm for assisted suicide in general. If you're saying this is torture, right, then if you're going through this pain, then you should have the ability to end it on your own terms. That's why I don't buy this saying that we're doing this just to make ourselves feel better. Not at all. If I was going to make myself feel better, and I had a magic political wand, then I'd have a completely different system in our hands, right? But I can't do that, right? I can't actually make myself feel better, right? All I can do is give these people the opportunity. And even this option was available, I think that only very few people would take it. I think most people would have that hope that, okay, especially if I didn't do it, right? You didn't do it, then there's a possibility that evidence comes up. People understand, right, that others get out. Because maybe the prosecutor fucked them over, which is a thing that happens, right? Maybe you had a bad trial to start with, and if you got a second one, things would turn out better. There's all kinds of reasons why these things happen, and especially if you are actually innocent, I think those people would stick around, right? Maybe a few of them would take that option. We could put safeguards in place to help evaluate them so that they don't feel pressured.
When engaging with assisted suicide, are you for them going through several stages of psychological evaluation to determine that they're fit? Okay, so how does one do that in prison?
Sorry, yeah, I would, right? And I'm for like medically assisted suicide, where like the element, right, the coercive element is their own body that's betraying them, that's causing them immense amount of pain. Even within that situation, I think you can evaluate a person, right, and to see that if they are capable of making this decision or not being pressured to do it for inheritance money or whatever the fuck.
So Prime, I want to hone in on the idea that like if someone was innocent and they had that element of hope that this would not be something that would be like an appealing option to them. I just don't think that really holds up. So going back to something like Destiny's opening, right, where he was basically saying like this creates a framework, an institution where certain choices and incentives are just super skewed. We already know that people faced with the choice of a lengthy trial and maybe losing, even though they know they're innocent, will take a plea deal and plead guilty to something that they didn't do, right? So we've agreed that this is some kind of suffering, some sort of immense pain that you're looking forward to. It's that, or it's I could just end it quickly. What's my possibility of getting out? Not that great, actually, unless something crazy happens, like if you happen to live in this transitional era where DNA evidence starts being a real thing, right? But now, like, what's the chances? What are the odds? I weigh my odds against like the bliss of nothingness, and I think the nothingness sounds really good. Yeah, I see it happening just the same way that people get pressured into pleading guilty for things that they didn't do all the time.
Even with that, I still don't feel like I can tell somebody, no, too bad. You have to live through this torture for the rest of your life because we don't have a better system for you.
You've already told them.
Then
that.
leave them the sheets in their cell. I don't know. Like
You've already told them that.
Why you have to incentivize this through an opt-in program? Like
the choice that we're making here, right, is between we have told you that we are going to torture you for the rest of your life. And then we're now presenting with a new policy idea, which is that you can opt out of that torture for the rest of your life by killing yourself. These are your two choices, right?
Both of these things are the same thing. If this person is so bad you don't want them to re-enter society, either you're removing them from society by imprisoning them forever, or you're removing them from society by allowing that person to end their life.
Go ahead, Doobie.
Yeah, so I'm wondering like what the extent of this is. So some of these guys, like Charles Ng, for example, who you can go on YouTube right now and find videos of this guy and Leonard Lake taunting a woman they're about to rape and murder. So there's no question this guy fucking did it. He had like multiple heart surgeries. The Son of Sam killer has had multiple heart surgeries. I think Son of Sam has like 6 life sentences. If they're in prison for life, I mean, would you support that, Scott? Like paying for all their surgeries and medical issues?
Then we have to determine what is and isn't reasonable in that regard. If there's some weird experimental procedure that costs an inordinate amount of money and has a very low likelihood of doing something. So we do have to determine what is reasonable. But the fact of the matter is that by taking away someone's freedom of movement, and by locking them in a cage, the state is responsible for their health, well-being, and safety when they take over ownership of this person and responsibility for this person.
You've acknowledged that it's torture.
Not only are we torturing them, but we're like going out of our way through like heart surgeries and shit that cost like hundreds of thousands of dollars to extend the torture.
Right, but again, I'm against the current system, right? Like,
I feel like Scott was right in the sense that like what this really comes down to is it possibly some sort of broader ethical system that you may have a pre-adherence to, or at least like some sort of theory about what criminal justice exists for. And at least in the United States, I know there's disagreements about why we should punish people, but the prison system as it originally developed in the United States, like sort of mid 1800s, was designed to be rehabilitative and punitive, right? It was supposed to be suffering, but the suffering was supposed to cause a kind of internal reflection. Like, what did I do to bring this on myself? Like, why have I done this? Would I ever do this again? And supposed to kind of scare them out of this. So in like the early prisons, like in Sing Sing and others like that, like they had enforced codes of silence, like extreme isolation. The idea was to inspire as much like self-reflection as possible. So when you reach the end of your term, you could, be a reformed person. And the data has always been against the idea that it actually worked. But like that was part of the idea. So what we're doing when we have a life sentence without the possibility of parole is monkeying with that system in some way that I think we're struggling with. Like what's the point? What's the goal? What's the end here? I think we're all like kind of dancing around.
I still feel like we haven't determined what is the difference in when we're removing somebody from a society because we've determined that they're too dangerous to be in society. What's the difference between putting them in prison for life and letting them end their own life?
One of the reasons is that they are alive, and that they are a valuable individual, right, on their own as a human being.
How are they contributing?
Okay, so then if that's the answer that you're going with, then that's a dangerous slip right there, because you could have a person who is like fucking paraplegic or some shit, right? Who is not contributing to society, and then we're talking about
specifically life in prison, though. We're talking about we have decided to remove this person from society because they are too dangerous to be part of it. So if you're in life in prison, what's the difference between keeping them in life in prison and allowing them to elect for execution?
This is why I brought up the ethics, right? Because the difference is, what do you believe is right and wrong? And we believe, and I believe at least, that it is wrong.
I think you guys are like afraid of the, purging the undesirable.
Why is it wrong?
But there's some people who are undesirable, i.e. rapists, murderers, serial killers, shit like this. Right? Why? And we decided that they're undesirable to the point where we stick them in a cage, right, away from everybody. Right, so like I don't.
Okay, Doobie. So if
why is it wrong?
It's a matter of purging the undesirables. You'd be in a cage, Doobie.
If the only moral equation you're going to do is what is the most successful thing to the rest of society, right? Then we can look at research that shows that the death penalty itself doesn't act as a deterrent against crime. And what we can do is we can go, well, you know what? Why does the death penalty not act as a deterrent? Well, that's because people sit in death row forever. It's essentially a long prison sentence. And really, people are just as scared of being caught so long as they're going to spend some time in prison.
Wrong?
So if we want to use it as a deterrent, since we have these serial killers, why don't we just take them out to a public stage and then flay them alive? And have it nationally televised, right? And then we can get some utility out of them, right?
Well, you'd have to like
problem
weigh that
is
against the societal trauma of like, you know, millions of people seeing somebody flayed alive by the government on TV.
I mean, right,
so it
but
doesn't
you
seem
don't
like
know. So let's
but I would
experiment.
support making it much
Reason,
easier to execute people, of course.
Is that your reason for why we put people away like this? Like, to me, I always thought the reason was we're removing this person. The most important part for me was that.
Stardust, it's your reasoning.
Okay. Explain to me exactly why it's wrong.
Because it's wrong to murder people, and it's wrong for the state
But
to
it's not
imprison
murdering
people for
It's
life
somebody
without
who wants
parole
to murder themselves.
while you're
Somebody who wants
torturing
to
them.
end their own life.
And
While you're
but
torturing
no,
them.
in assisted suicide, you are bringing someone else into this equation. You have to like.
Yes,
We're
but they're
talking about
making
somebody
that
opting
decision
into a death
themselves.
penalty, right? I mean, if y'all are cool with the guy who like consented to being cannibalized, I guess that's fine. But like, you're bringing somebody else into the equation who's going to be doing the killing of you, right?
Yeah,
You're
and
asking for help,
they
so
don't-
it's not just you.
I mean, yeah, sure, but again, it's their body, right? If they want to end their life, that should be their choice to do. I don't understand. You still haven't explained to me like what's wrong about it.
I'm just not going to devolve this discussion into like going deep into like why I believe in a natural law philosophy and like why I'm against certain that like it's like I'm not going to go that deep down.
So okay, I'm
It was
on a panel
already-
and
it was
I'm not going
already
to
too
engage
much
with
for
the
you,
question.
Stardust.
Okay.
So I actually had so Destiny, like earlier you said that you know, well that's what the punishment is, right? We've decided they're gonna be in prison forever. They don't get to opt out. Would you then like support extending their life through like you know, medical intervention when they have issues and shit? Like how far would you take that?
I mean, I don't think we've decided that the punishment needs to be like an immortality of suffering or something, right? So I mean, if somebody
Right.
is in prison and they want to sign like a DNR, I don't think anybody would be opposed to that.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Scott, what do you think about that? So somebody's being tortured in prison and they have a health issue. And would you say that it's okay for them to sign a DNR, right? So that if they were to die from this health issue, no, don't resuscitate them. Because they're doing this under duress, you remember.
No.
So
I don't think they have the will to be able to sign a DNR while under duress. No. It's the same argument, right? I don't think they have the will under duress to be able to say that they want to kill themselves. So why would they magically have that same will when you just add like a little bit more of health issues? Like, no, they don't
Add
have the
some
capacity.
paperwork to it, yeah.
The argument stands the same. You have to be consistent here. I mean, it sucks for that person that like they have cancer and they're in like death row and we're like, have some chemo, buddy. But like,
You have to be consistent.
we have a fucked up
Or
system.
vomiting for however long you're. in
Do you have to be
chemotherapy.
consistent or do you have to be empathetic?
Being consistent is being empathetic.
I disagree. When you're saying that I'm going to extend this torture, so maybe not replacing their hearts with monkey hearts, right? Maybe not that, right? We're going to keep them alive for as long as possible, even if they say they don't want to, right? So they could be going through like chemo or something, right? Which is, as I understand it, absolutely fucking terrible. And then they're saying, well, okay, if my body starts to give out, let me go. You're saying no, while you're in prison, you don't have the right to consent there. And so, yeah, you're going to go through a prison and then the extra torture of chemo.
You're saying that the state shouldn't have the ability to like, or the right to kill somebody, right? But you'd give them the right to keep somebody alive in torturous conditions for as long as possible? Someone who doesn't want to be in those conditions?
They do not have the ability to consent to kill themselves because they are being tortured. The state is the guardian of that person. They're responsible for the health and safety of that person.
Do you think normal
Right,
people should have the right to sign a DNR since their ability to consent is compromised since they're suffering from a disease?
To bring up your already defeated point that it's not the
Scott,
same thing.
What do you think? Wait, what do you think a DNR is?
Do not resuscitate. It means if you're dying.
Yeah,
they're
so
not gonna
we
attempt
were
to
just
bring you back
talking
to life.
about. So do you think normal people should be allowed to have DNRs?
Yes.
Yeah, but prisoners aren't. So aren't you technically like revoking rights from them for your moral answer here? Like you're taking something.
I'm not
away-
revoking rights. The state doesn't guarantee rights. The state has taken guardianship
I'm
of
sorry.
someone because they've taken away their rights.
So in that case, though, the prisoner basically has less rights afforded to them than like a person in a hospital would. No, because now if they were in a
Yes,
normal
because
hospital,
the state took them.
Okay.
It doesn't then get to torture them with the idea of getting them back so that they can kill themselves. Especially when we know that the system isn't perfect. Some people are going to choose to kill themselves and later be found innocent.
This seems like a contradiction. So you're opposed to assisted suicide. I think that was your position, but you're in favor of people being able to sign
that's
DNRs.
Eucharist. That's Eucharist.
Okay, so you're for assisted suicide.
Yeah, I'm all for assisted suicide.
Okay, yeah.
Eucharist has an opinion from a different angle, and I actually want to examine that too for our remaining time on this topic.
I don't think there is an inherent contradiction between opposing assisted suicide and being okay with DNRs, because withdrawal of care is ethically different than active intervention to hasten death, and that's an ethical distinction that already exists in medical care and in hospitals. So the work has been done to defend it, and we can use some fancy terms like doctrine of double effect to hash it out, but I'm openly opposed to assisted suicide. So the reason I come into this conversation saying no, we should not give the prisoner an opportunity to kill themselves is just because up front I'm already opposed to that class of things which I would consider assisted suicide. So all these considerations about like, well, this is torture, it's not super persuasive to me. I think in both cases, I actually do think the case of the prisoner and the case of the cancer patient are analogous in some way, in the sense that I just think y'all are silly to think of suicide as this like one glorious liberty option in this scenario. I don't view it as like giving somebody some sort of like essential freedom that improves their situation in any way necessarily.
So, but if someone has like a very serious condition, right? They're like a terminal illness. There's no hope that they're going to recover from this thing, and they'd rather check out early than go through the pain that's going to get them to the point where they can use a DNR. You'd say that they should go through that pain, that they should wait for their body to decay while they're alive, and and then you're gonna not resuscitate them. Like, why would you? I don't understand. Yeah. Like.
It's a conversation Prime and I had at length one-on-one after the last time we argued about this, which is I don't think that an individual's suffering justifies doing something that I already think is a bad thing to do.
Why
that
do
you ought
bad?
not do, like kill yourself. It's evil. It's wrong.
Why do
you believe in like mercy killing? Like if somebody's like fucking agony and there's no they're like split open.
Yeah.
So you would just let them suffer until they die.
I think you would try to do whatever you could to comfort them until they died. Yeah. So we have palliative care. We have ethics surrounding these issues of how we bring people comfort in as they are dying and as they are suffering. But that's different than intervening to kill them. Those are two different things. Yeah.
Why is it evil?
We can bring Scott's terms back into this. I buy into a natural law theory, some things about the intrinsic value of human life, et cetera, et cetera. Human life is a good unless there's some greater good that outweighs it.
Human life can be good.
Yeah.
Human life can be good, but you can still acknowledge that, like, when it's time for somebody to choose to go, then.
I don't think in most non-exigent circumstances we get to choose to go. I think there are circumstances where choosing to go could be legitimate. We could hash that out. It's a whole complex ethics conversation.
Because you're saying that if somebody is like they're going to suffer, there's no way to stop the suffering. Maybe you can give some pain meds, but they're gonna decay. They're gonna die. There's no way to cure this disease. You would say, you need to go through that pain rather than like checking out comfortably.
Stopping suffering is an end ethical goal that we should pursue at any expense.
I just don't get how it's wrong. I just don't get how it's wrong to give somebody that choice when you know that they have,
because it's not a choice.
It is a choice. The other choice that they have is suffering. I don't understand how it's wrong to give them an alternative to that.
Because killing them is wrong.
So in the case of the prisoners, we're not going to let them out, right? Because we've decided they're danger to everybody. In the case of the person with the terminal illness, there's no way for us to get rid of that illness. We can't just magic it away. It just seems like you guys are in favor of causing these people suffering for like no good reason.
I'm not in favor of causing them suffering. They're experiencing suffering, and I'm not in favor of all available options of alleviating
allowing them to die.
Mm-hmm.
Not allowing them to die is like literally causing them suffering.
No,
right?
they're in a circumstance. They have an illness or something that is causing them suffering, right? And then there are things that you could do to alleviate that suffering potentially. And I don't think all things that alleviate suffering are necessarily good, legitimate, fine, whatever.
I don't think it's good to prolong somebody in suffering, though. I think that's wrong too. I think that's evil too.
I wouldn't say it is a good thing to prolong someone's suffering. I would say there are things that you ought not do to shorten suffering. I could come up with a crazy moral dilemma that would say, if you do this horrific thing, it would alleviate someone's suffering. I think we could think of examples where you would say, no, okay, that's not okay.
The very idea of suicide for most people is that they feel that they are suffering so much, they would rather not suffer any longer. I guess in your approximation, the idea of prison is just to keep society safe. You don't believe in rehabilitation for these people because they're on death row. And you also don't believe in there needing to be a sense of justice for these people.
No,
Right?
it's
So
not the state says that.
Nothing
The
will be
state has already done that. No matter what change they make within prison, they're still going to be in prison where they become that paragon you're talking about, right? And you already established that it's torture. Then let's give them another option.
Thank you for reframing everything that I was saying. The problem is do you trust in any way, shape, or form the capacity of the state to actually not just murder people? My uncle, for example, right? My uncle was in a relationship and murdered someone who was black and he was white in Memphis. It may have been a passion killing or something. They're both high on crack. He didn't really murder her because she was black. They were dating, but he murdered a black woman. And he's in constant threat of being murdered by other people. Do you honestly believe that the prison system is going to actually use its power responsibly to allow in suicide for people that are only very properly vetted in their desire to go out simply because that's the choice they're making? And how do you separate that from the torture that they're going under?
I think that kind of goes on with what Destiny was saying at the very start. Like, as to why you were against it because there's like conflicts of interest. Could you expand on that? Yeah.
I wasn't saying there was conflict of interest. I was saying that they're like weird perverse incentives.
Yeah.
There's probably going to be a disproportionate number of like ethnic groups will disproportionately get into like the choosing to take the death penalty. Certain prison systems are probably going to like some prisons might just be really bad, and so people are going to elect to pick the death penalty here. And then we also it'll feel like, okay, well, some people are choosing this because the prison system is so fucked here. This isn't right. Like something should change here.
I would agree. The response there, though, if we acknowledge, right, that these systems are so bad and they are being tortured, that exists, right? Whether us as a society are paying attention to this problem or not, right? And some of those places are really bad. So I think the greatest problem with my argument is that it gives those places that have the least empathy, who are the most vicious to the prisoners, reasons to be more vicious to a certain segment of their population, right? Because there's a possibility that they would do this. So I think that's fair criticism. Still, I wouldn't want to take this this possibility away from the prison system as a whole, right? The prison, the lifers as a whole. I would rather look for other solutions, and there are other solutions, than saying that you simply don't get this option.
Can we do it under our today's system, or do we wait until we have like a more perfect system, or what do you mean?
Do what under the system? What
I'm wondering is if it's like actually the system, right? So if we had a perfect system where we knew people who were actually guilty, and the prison system wasn't like shit, and people weren't getting raped and beaten up in prison, and the guards weren't shit, and everybody was nice, and yada yada yada. But we still had people who were serial killers, serial rapists, right? Who was too dangerous to have in society. So we decided to stick them in prison with the possibility of parole, Scott, for life, right? But these were people that are so fucking dangerous that the chances of them actually attaining parole are pretty low, right? So if we had that system, would you then be for allowing people to go with assisted suicide?
We don't have any understanding of the human brain that would evolve us into such a creature, or understanding of the technology and what its impacts on the world would be. You're talking about science fiction beyond.
I feel like you're not engaged. I feel like there's no reason
I'm not engaged with it
because hypothetical.
I think when it comes to this type of perfection, I think it becomes really hard to like, because so many things are changing at this point that like the structures that we're even analyzing are just like incomprehensible to what we have now. It's kind of like saying, imagine if you could like rape people who could like delete their minds and have no problems, but then also turn back time. Does that make it okay? Like it becomes incomprehensible at that point, I think.
Yeah,
everything surrounding these systems would change. Who goes to jail? Why they go to jail? Can they be rehabilitated? What kind of rehabilitation we have? How do we sentence people? Like everything would change so much that the answer becomes meaningless, I think.
Like, does crime even exist in that society? Like,
yeah.
Like we don't.
There's not like a conceivable system right? That you guys can imagine, right? In the future, at any point,
No.
right? In your incap society, maybe where having the option of opting assisted suicide would be reasonable, because we're not dealing with the racism or whatever the fuck that might lead people to pushing people to that option.
If I was envisioning my perfect society, like I don't even believe in involuntary prisons, dude.
Okay,
Like-
so it seems like the issue isn't so much the system itself, because we can't even imagine the system where
No, the
okay,
issue
so
is
it-
the system itself.
So this is some like some deep-seated moral position that probably doesn't make any sense.
Sure, it doesn't make any
Okay.
sense. It's such a crazy idea that people believe the state killing its citizens is wrong.
Yeah, I think plenty of
But
people
it's
out
not
there
even
can
the
think of
s-
situations where it might be okay for the state to kill somebody.
It's not even the state killing. If it's the person who wants to die, right? The state is just assisting them.
Would it make
I mean,
a
I
difference
feel
if
like
it
that's
was
a distinction without a difference.
Would it make a
I mean,
difference?
how could you even be for assisted suicide then? If we could talk about the society as it is, right? And oh God, this terrible corrupt capitalist system, right, where people are forced to grind their nose against a stone to get food on their table, and to drink water, and to have clothing and shit like that. This system drives people into depression, into despair. So how could we possibly allow people to kill themselves if the system itself is what's making them depressed?
Is it conceivable that there are people in prison that are of sound mind and body that want to kill themselves? Yes. The problem is that they are in custody. And the ability for us to differentiate between those people that are of sound mind and body that want to kill themselves for whatever reason, and of those that are doing so because of the circumstances of the torture that they are in, is part of the problem. And the other part of the problem is that the state has become custodians of these people by taking away their rights.
We already agree that
Their
they have some kind of
responsibility
responsibility to fund these people's healthcare and shit like that.
Yeah.
Right. So if one of the requirements is that they go through a lengthy examination with multiple visits with a psychiatrist or therapist or whatever the fuck, right? And maybe you can even give them medication to try to help with their depression, try to convince them out of this mindset. Right? If none of that works, right, and they still want to kill themselves, and the state has gone above and beyond to try to make sure this person is of sound mind when they're making this decision, would you still say that the state shouldn't do it?
Unless if you're equating the state providing a psychologist for the state being able to determine people that are in torturous conditions and isolated and being tortured, and all of the variables that go into that, the state being able to adequately screen all of those people, it's an impossibility.
I don't see how that's even more complicated than somebody who has been sexually assaulted multiple times, and they're going to psychiatrists and saying, "Hey, I want to kill myself," because there are tons of factors there, right? Maybe it's their home life, maybe it's their job, maybe they're not eating right, maybe they need medication, right? So I don't think it's any less complicated.
Go and talk to and I know that you probably have, but go talk to them again. Counselors, masters in social work, or psychologists, right? And they'll admit, if they've been doing it for quite a long time, right, that they make mistakes, that there's tons of things that they didn't catch, that they think they're getting some progress with somebody, and then the next thing you know, they end up committing suicide, and they had no idea that was going to happen. It's a thing that counselors and mental health professionals constantly have to engage in, is burnout from the failures that they have.
Okay, but then why are you for assisted suicide if you're saying that the people, because earlier you asked Prime, hey, are you for these people seeing therapists and whatnot prior? Prime said yes, and you're okay with that. But if you're saying now that those people can make mistakes, and I think we can all acknowledge that people make mistakes sometimes, right? Why would you be in favor of allowing them to kill themselves if the people that they're going to make that determination?
Again,
could
I've
be
already
making
made
mistakes?
this argument. It's very simple. There's a massive difference between the state that has taken away people's civil liberties and put them in a torturous position, and the difficulties and the conundrums with that, and people that are presumably out and free, and their liberty and their choices. Pardon me.
You think somebody has the ability to make the determination with somebody who's out in the wild feeling depressed and wanting to kill themselves? But if somebody who is forcibly in a cage because they've killed people or whatever, you think that's too far, right? That's a bridge too far.
Yes.
You're pro whatever the state decides, as long as it's not killing the prisoner.
We're not talking about what I support. Like I said, I don't support involuntary prisons.
I don't know why there'd be like this, as soon as this person is forcibly in a cage, right, suddenly we're too far for somebody to make a determination as to whether or not, they're a sound mind. Like, do prisoners just not have the ability to consent to anything because they're under duress?
What do you mean by consent to anything? Can they not consent to a choice between fucking whether or not they want the cornbread or whether or not they want the brownie? Like, what are you talking about?
Well, sometimes these people have like a conjugal visits, right? Where somebody will come and have sex with them. So given that this person is under duress, they're stuck in a situation where they have no access to the opposite sex, and somebody pops up who wants to have sex with them, right? They might not actually want to have sex with this person, right? But they're forced to, because it's their only option, right? So do they really have consent in that situation?
So you're saying people can't sexually consent in prison?
I think they can. You're saying that they can't consent to like end their life. So what else can they consent to? Under duress.
It's an interesting question psychologically that I think would actually require research to better understand. That's my answer. Like, I think that's actually an interesting thing for sex researchers to look into, is the ability of people to psychologically consent under the trauma of prison.
I weirdly agree with Doobie's take here in the sense that I don't know that there is a meaningful difference in ability to consent under duress, regardless of where the duress is coming from, whether it is literally pathological, like your body is attacking you, whether it is the state enforcing some sort of punishment against you. All of these situations of duress, I feel like, are equivalent and monkey with our traditional conceptions of free and informed consent in some way. I think that's a fair intuition.
Yeah, I think, if it is like they can't consent, it's like some form of rape. Like, I might need to have different plans for this weekend because that'd be kind of fucked.
I'm sorry that you asked an interesting question and you demanded that someone like plant the flag in the hill, but like that is an actually interesting question that I feel like would actually require better research to understand.